Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the D-Club podcast, and today's very special guest is a new good friend of mine, Ross Young. Again, if people haven't heard of Ross will give a good introduction in a second, but Ross has lots of content online. Show him some love. He has his own podcast and a whole host of other things, but I don't want to spoil this. So over to you, Ross, in terms of an introduction, please.
Hi, everyone. It's Ross Young. I'm super excited to be here. So just a little bit about me. I spent over 10 and a half years at the Central Intelligence Agency. I've worked in big banking sector. So I've worked at Capital One, and I was the CISO at Caterpillar Financial for 4 years. As Leo mentioned, I've also done the CISO Tradecraft podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, please subscribe. It's a great place where you can go and learn how to be a CISO. And most importantly, today I'm in the venture capital space helping to build the next generation of cybersecurity startups for an Israeli company called Team8.
Excellent introduction, Ross. And again, just to touch on the podcast that you're involved in my opinion, is one of the most comprehensive podcasts and associated content. So everything from newsletters, dedicated resources. If you are looking to get into cybersecurity or you're making your way through a management track, you need to check this out. Like, when this goes live, there's going to be lots of animation, GIFs, pointing, everything. We're gonna absolutely tart this up, Ross, because CISO Tradecraft, when I'd come across it and when you were sharing some information recently, when you and I were bouncing some ideas off of each other, I was absolutely blown away. And everyone that I've spoken to that knows Ross speaks very highly of him. So everyone, please show some love and share his content and get involved. Ross is very active within our community and one of our frontiers when it comes to what we're doing. So again, Ross, thank you so much for being in the podcast. And you are someone that I am learning from as well and hoping to make this podcast better. And then, we'll dive right in then. So obviously, you've kind of given us a brief overview of your career, and then talk me through what you're doing in the venture capital space. You've mentioned Team8. Team8's a company that I'm very familiar with, but if you want to expand on what Team8 are doing within our industry, and ultimately what they're up to this year and next year.
Okay, so I know some of the listeners are probably thinking, why would this CIA American have anything to do with an Israeli company? And it's because, if you haven't heard, Israel is really becoming the nexus for cybersecurity. And I'll just give you a couple examples. In the past year, if you were to go and look at all the major mergers and acquisitions in cybersecurity, 14 out of the last 18 have had Israeli ties. Either the company came out of there or one of the co-founders is Israeli-led. So that's a huge thing. And here's the reason why. It's because in Israel, most people are required to do government service in the military, right? So it's almost like a mandatory draft, and they go in something called the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. And if you are the smartest of the smart, you get cherry-picked to go into the Israel version of NSA. Right? So where all the offensive cyber hacking tends to happen, right? And they call this Unit 8200. And so this is where the smartest of people are going, and they're getting this just, world-class knowledge of cybersecurity. And then after these folks leave the federal service, they end up going and working in big name companies, Checkpoint, Microsoft, Google's, Palo Altos of the world. And then a few years later, they decide, hey, I want to do a cybersecurity startup, and I want to build the next generation of tools to help the world. And that's where Team8 comes in. We are a venture capital company that's Israeli founded. Our founders were the head of 8200. So if you were to look at Nadav, he was one of the leaders. And so we have a great connection to this talent base coming out of Israel. And then we actually partner a lot with America. And so all the Fortune 500 companies have opportunities to invest through their venture capital funds. So we partner with Capital One Ventures and Walmart and other big name US companies that you've heard of. We take investment from them. We have over $1 billion, and we invest in these cyber startups coming out of Israel. And then we work with CISOs across the world. So think of Fortune 500 CISOs. They're going to say, hey, I have this problem. I need better AI security or something else like that. And then we listen to hundreds of them. And we go to Black Hat and RSAs, and we see everything emerging in the new vendor space. And we say, CISOs want this, but the market is only giving this right here. So we think there's an opportunity to create this new company that doesn't exist. And then we give some money and we help these founders get stood up. And then afterwards, we own, some percentage of that company and through our investments, and then help them become profitable, and we're profitable. So that is Teammate in a nutshell. But basically, we're a venture capital company that focuses on cybersecurity. And the other thing that we do that's really special is we build a village of CISOs. We don't claim to know cybersecurity better than anybody, but we claim to learn from more CISOs than anybody else. So I'm constantly meeting with hundreds of CISOs. And if you're a CISO, please reach out to me. Ross Young, I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a conversation. So that's it.
Excellent, Ross. And I think, giving a bit of a flavour around what VCs actually do. And ultimately, that's why we have so many outstanding world-class cyber talent and companies, is ultimately because of the incubation, which I would probably call going from into military service, then gaining those skills and then eventually building those companies. That's why, everyone, we have so many cybersecurity companies coming out of Israel. And then circling back into your career, Ross, talk me through some of the challenges that you've been faced with within the industry, and you can go as deep as you like on that.
Yeah, so I've had a fun career. I've done a lot of the offensive cybersecurity. So thinking about how do we break into places through human ways, through technical ways, all these different ways to hack into banks primarily. And then afterwards, I decided I needed to level up my skills. So then I cross-trained to doing all of the cloud security and DevOps and really did a lot in the DevSecOps space. So that's kind of been how I've grown up through the ranks of cybersecurity. And then as I started taking leadership roles as a segment CISO at Capital One and working with thousands of developers, and also as the CISO at Caterpillar Financial for 4 years, where Caterpillar Financial, most people never heard of. You probably heard of Caterpillar, the large construction mining equipment company. They have their own bank and insurance. So for all the loans, leases, insurance things, so that the whole company doesn't get caught up in banking and insurance regulation. So I led all the cyber protections around that. And that was a fun journey. And I really enjoyed it. And there were some definitely unique challenges. I mean, if you think having one regulator is bad, try being in 200 countries. Right? That's all sorts of new types of fun for CISOs. So I do that, and then I've really been just trying to give back in the thought leadership and the content space to help CISOs based on the lessons I'm learning and the observations I'm seeing from the industry.
And what would you say is like your biggest challenge you've been faced with as a CISO? You've got quite a varied career. You've been in government level, you've been hosting private companies, there must have been some challenges you thought, wow, we're in a sticky situation, obviously within the relevance of your clearance and everything else you can talk about. But run me through some of those challenges.
So I'll give you a few challenges that I experienced. The first one is when you look at cybersecurity, you think you get to focus on the major risk reduction factors, right? Hey, everybody's getting phished. We need to build all these phishing programs to stop these bad attacks. Hey, everybody is building insecure websites. We're going to really focus on that. But what I didn't realize is just how much compliance steals resources away from things you want to do. So, for example, you may want to build something that's extremely focused on vuln management because your developers are not patching fast enough. However, if the New York Department of Financial Services says you have to attest and write to the state of New York every year that you're doing these things, guess what gets moved to your top of priority list, even if you don't believe any of these things will actually secure your company, right? And I'll just give you an example. At no point in time has a policy ever stopped a bad actor from hacking into your company, right? They don't read your policies. They don't ever do that. Like, they're phishing your users or they're finding ways to break into your systems. Yet so many of the controls will say, do you have an acceptable use policy? And not only do you have it, but did you modify it or at least review it to make sure it's still correct from a year ago? And so you spend all these times checking these little GRC compliance things that really don't move the needle. And so that was like one of the first things I really had to come to experience in the role. Let me just pause here before I go on to the next topics. Any questions, Leo, on that one, or does that sound pretty?
No, no. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems like, you know, as a CISO, we always have these competing priorities and things shift, and it feels like we can never really plan maybe a week or so ahead, and we always feel like, when we get interviewed for a role, people are like, give me your 30, 60, 90-day plan, and it's like, there's hardly anything on your plan, and it's like, because everything moves so frequently. But yeah, sorry, back to you, Ross, in terms of your second item.
Yeah, so that was the first thing that I got to experience. Then the second thing that I really had to understand is how to influence culture. And you may see things that are very apparent to you. Like, let's just take, for example, identity. Identity is a mess today. There are 45 more machine identities than human identities in an organization. And when I say machine identities, I mean things like SSH keys, API keys, all these credentials and tokens that we have. And so what happens is we spend all our time saying we're going to MFA all the things, but we're only talking about humans here. And that's not what the bad actors are really focused on. They're going to fish a human, they're going to land on that person's laptop, and then they're going to go, oh, let me look at the history of everything in the command line. And now, if you have SSH keys that are valid for 90 days, well, now they're going to go and use those against your company, right? So these identity-based attacks, number one, most important thing to focus on if you read the Verizon data breach report for 2024. And now imagine you're like, oh my gosh, this is a bad thing. I got to focus on this. Now you got to go over and convince the CIO that every app needs to prioritize on this. And right now, the only reason they hear it is because you said it. There's nothing that they're feeling the pain if they don't do this tomorrow. It's not, charging them money. If anything, they're seeing the opportunity of not being able to build new features because they're going to have to port all their apps to something like this. So when I started realizing, oh man, how am I going to influence all these people to do all these things? I started reading about gamification in video games. Because here's the subtle tip that I want you to know, that video games are probably the most addicting thing out there, other than, let's call it, drugs and gambling and other things like that. But even the gambling machines in Vegas are video games, if you think about it, and they use these gamification techniques. So how do we study these things to figure out how we can drive change in viral, mass adoptive ways? And so that was another thing that was really, really helpful for me, because I realized I had to really improve my ability to influence change when certain things weren't naturally appealing to developers at first hand.
I love it. It's great insight. And, while we're speaking of identities, it is such a hot topic. And I think it's probably going to dominate next year in terms of non-human identities. But, what's your opinion? You're very close to, the situation with Teammate. They're obviously building loads of different companies. What do you see as the future of identity or identity management? As you said, it's a mess. It's always been a mess. Do you think there'll be any changes in 25? What do you think the future looks like under identity?
Yeah, so historically, companies have bought probably two tools that I've seen over and over again. So they may have bought something like a HashiCorp Vault to put all of their secrets in, and you can do secrets in cloud native ways from AWS or Amazon as well. The other thing that I've also seen them do is use these human PAM solutions, privileged access management, like a CyberArk. And I am seeing the convergence of these tools into something that's newer, that's better. And, Teammate is one example. We have a portfolio company called Achilles that combines these things. But ultimately, what I think we're going to do is shift as an industry to saying, hey, I have a key that never expires or rotates once a quarter, to this key rotates every 12 hours. That way, if this key is ever stolen by an actor, they have to log in to my developer laptop every 12 hours to steal the new key. And hopefully by then, I'm going to have some CrowdStrike EDR catch on to that, and then I can stop them, and it's a quick remediation. That, I think, is the first step. And the even better solution is to go to something which is keyless. How do you have something on your machine and their machine just naturally integrate, so I'm not even sending keys and they have these trusted identities? So I think that's where we're going to go, because I think nobody wants to play key remediation cleanup. Having someone dig through GitHub month after month after month to clean keys, to tell developers don't use this. We're just going to block them from entering the repo entirely. And afterwards, we need to have better solutions that make it more secure for us long term.
I love it. And what we're trying to do is reduce friction and obviously not become another overhead where lots of different voices count against security. And, when you were talking about aspects of culture, how as a CISO or in your CISO roles, how would you sell cyber to technical and non-technical teams? Because this is a thing where it comes up a lot on the podcast where, we mentioned gamification definitely works, beer, pizza, bonusly points, gift vouchers, whatever it may be. Like, have you found an approach that works everywhere that you've been in terms of selling cyber to that technical, non-technical audience?
So I'll tell you how I've done it in two different ways. The first way I've done it is this approach I call cheaper, faster, better. And here's what I mean by this. When I was at Capital One, there was a team that did Jenkins. And when I got over there, I looked, and it was a very insecure app that had a lot of vulnerabilities because they had all these different types of software they were supporting. And I was like, that's not a great spot to be in. And I could go over to the Jenkins team and I could say, hey, I want you to patch these vulnerabilities. And they would do it. And then next month, new CVEs would come out, and I'd have to go back and tell them the same thing again. So you can see how this is just toil, right? They don't want to do this work. It takes time away from things. So what you want to do is to talk to them and say, I want to understand how much time we spend on maintaining this service versus building new features. And maybe you're going to find out that, man, this is a legacy app that sucks. We're spending 80% of our time on maintenance. Well, if I got 10 people and 80% is maintenance, that means effectively 8 people are doing maintenance activities. And if I know the headcount of that is 200K or 250K, that's like $1.6 million that's just being thrown as a sunk cost. I don't think any chief financial officer wants to just throw 1.6 million out the door. So there's an opportunity there. So what you do is you talk to the team a little bit and you say, what if we can make this cheaper, faster, and better? Could we build version 2 of this app that's serverless? And now we don't have to patch the OS or the middleware, and all that goes away. Do you like that? And they're like, dude, I love that. That's freaking awesome. Let's do this. And so now we say, okay, and you got to figure out what are the new features you're going to build so it also helps you. And so now we go over to their leadership team and say, hey, how would you like to reduce the headcount? Maybe we can get from 80% maintenance to 30% maintenance, which means we could redeploy 5 developers on a different team that needs help. So now the IT management loves this because there's always some business pressure to do more on a different project. And we can do this. And now the IT management plus the developers plus cyber are going as this unified front over to the chief finance officer and saying, hey, it's going to take $2 million to rewrite this app. But if we do it, we're going to save $1.6 million every single year on these maintenance costs. If we can, bring these down, and maybe we can only bring them down to 50%. So maybe we're only going to save $1 million a year. So in 2 years, this will have paid for itself, $2 million to transition, $1 million savings per year. And this is the way you have to think about cheaper, faster, better, and partnership opportunities. If you do that, that's a great, great way. So that's my first way of how to build partnership. And I'll tell you the second in just a minute.
I absolutely love that sound logic, Ross. And I think once you articulate a story, it's almost like writing a user story. And I think a lot of CISOs or leaders don't really think like that. And that for me is like, it's just gold dust. It's incredible to hear because it's simple, it's logical, and then it translates with anyone. But yeah, please, back to you, Ross. Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody gets to win. The developers get to say they built new features, so they're getting a promotion. The IT manager gets to say, hey, we moved 5 headcount from this legacy app to help the business. So the business loves the IT managers. And the chief finance officer and all their minions get to go and say, hey, we're saving millions of dollars on these, tech debt every single year by fixing these things. Everybody wins, right? So that's a huge thing. The next thing that I will say that's been really, really helpful in influence and partnership is the one-on-one connections. And so what I recommend is whenever you're a CISO or someone in a new role, you want to talk to all of your stakeholders. And you want to go to them and you want to say, what's working well? What sucks? And what things do you wish we did that we don't do today? And then you just listen. And they're going to tell you some things that are really hard to change. And they're going to tell you some low-hanging fruit of things you can do. And guess what? If you can go fix those easy things for them, now all of a sudden they'll see you as a doer. They'll see you as someone who listens, who actually helps them. And guess what? They'll remember that. And it's kind of this phrasing that you hear from Think and Grow Rich or Dale Carnegie, how to influence, win friends and influence people. But if you can serve other people first, it naturally creates this reciprocity where they want to help you as well, right? So you go and you do all these things for them. And then later on, you're going to need a favor and you're going to call them and say, hey, I need help doing this. This is really what we need to do, but I need your help. I need you to champion. I need you to support. I need to give resources. And then because you've laid that foundation, you built that relationship of trust, they're going to come in and help you because work is based on friendships. And I know we want to just do the right things, but I got to tell you, if somebody has helped me through jams multiple times, I'm going to take their call and I'm probably going to help them, right? Even if it isn't top of the priority list, I know that being a good person and being a good friend is helping my friends. And so I think it's these personal dynamics that we have to build these relationships. We have to serve others and take that servant leadership approach. And then from there, we can actually use that to our advantage.
Love it. It's everyone. That is how you build trust. I absolutely love that, Ross. Amazing. And in terms of like jumping into that, a topic that you want to discuss that you feel needs relevance or clearing up within the industry.
Right now, I think third-party risk management is probably the most broken thing in our industry. And let me just explain it to our listeners in case they haven't heard or seen the dirty secrets behind the scenes. So if I'm a large company and I have 200 vendors, my third-party process looks like the following. Hey, vendor, would you like to do business with my company? Well, I need you to send a Cloud Security Alliance CAIQ, fill out those 200 questions. I need you to send your last pen test report. I need you to send these 10 cybersecurity policies. Oh, by the way, we're going to put you through BitSight or Security Scorecard so we can scan all your internet-facing assets and tell you what you need to fix. And then we need to look at a couple other things. And if you do all of that, then I'm just going to evaluate against my own criteria for my own company, which doesn't match anybody else's. And I'm going to probably have 3 things that you do that I don't agree with, right? And so we do all these things. Then we go back to our business leaders and say, hey, I know you wanted to use DocuSign, but DocuSign isn't an approved company, so you went with this alternate vendor. We did the third-party risk assessment on them in this country. And we found these 3 scary things that we don't like. They don't monitor and log. They don't have a SOC 2 that's current, things like that. And they're going to be like, yeah, but I got no other options. I'm going to pick it anyway. Okay, whatever. We're going to accept that risk and move forward. So what happens is everybody spends a lot of time and resources on something that makes 0 difference. The vendor spent all this time filling out all this documentation for me so they could win a contract. My team spent, probably 50 to 100 hours, looking at all this vendor negotiation saying, oh, you didn't fill out line 3 in the questionnaire, so please resubmit, and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, if I were to go and say, well, look at the top attacks from 2024 for publicly breached companies, and I'm looking at AT&T and others, did my third-party process actually detect any of them? Probably not. And so we spend all this time doing this very human, manual intensive thing that doesn't mean anything, doesn't detect anything, but we can tell our insurance providers and our auditors, we have a great third-party risk process, please leave us alone. So that is my thing of what I think is most broken in our industry today.
Let's talk about something that might be keeping you awake at night. Cybersecurity. According to Vanta's latest State of Trust report, it's the number one concern for UK businesses. That's where Vanta comes in. Whether you're a startup, growing fast, or already established, Vanta can help you get ISO 27001 certified and more without the headaches. Vanta allows your company to centralize security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risks to help your team not only get compliant, but stay compliant. Stop stressing over cybersecurity and start focusing on growing your business in 2025. Check out Vanta and let us handle the tough stuff. Head to vanta.com/decloak to learn more. Because when it comes to your business, it's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about keeping everything secure. Thanks. Amazing. And I'm interested, Ross, you're heavily involved in a lot of products that are either in stealth or coming to market. Is this something like GRC can fix? Where can AI help? Obviously we're seeing a lot of GRC platforms like Drada, Vanta, using things like trust centers that kind of help maybe reduce that burden of answering all the questions, because then it's like one page, okay, they tick the box for everything, and then make the person at the other side do the work. Do you see any kind of, I don't know, breathing space? Because it absolutely sucks to do third party. Like the questionnaires, like I used to get them, it'd be like 500-600 questions, and I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm like, I refuse. I'm having a stroke here. So, but yeah, I'm interested to get your point of view on that, Ross.
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities for improvement here. The first thing is, do I actually need a human to review all this documentation? Maybe not. Maybe I can train a AI bot to look through a SOC 2 to find findings, look through a pen test report, look through your documentation. And we're seeing this. There's companies like CISO Trust that specialize in this area that can help automate a lot of your, let's call it tier 1 third-party risk management activities. I think that's the first thing. The second thing that I would say is there's a lot of things we do that I don't think make sense to me. And I'll just give you an example. If I'm a medium-sized company and I want to use Salesforce, and so does every other company in the world, why do I believe my third-party risk assessment is going to find something about Salesforce that the 10,000 other companies who bought Salesforce didn't already discover? Probably not. So how might I just ask them to say, hey, show me a couple other Fortune 500 companies who's done a third-party pen test results that said, hey, this is good enough for us. Because if it's good enough for Google, or if it's good enough for Microsoft or a top 10 bank, it's probably good enough for my small, medium business. And not only that, but I probably don't actually bring enough revenue to Salesforce for them to care to actually change anything in their product to meet my additional security requirements. So I think we're going to look for opportunities like that. The next thing is, I think we need to really step back to say, what does I most care about? So if I most care about checking the box, what does the box actually require? Do I need to do the full 500 questionnaire, or could I have a questionnaire that's maybe only 20 questions? Maybe the 20 questions are specific to the largest data breaches from last year that I need to worry about. Like, hey, if tomorrow my social security numbers that I sent you ended up in a Target breach or some other major company breach, what would you do? Who would I call? What would I, interact to fix this problem? because that's probably what I care more about, is to figure out what I got to tell my customers, who's the POC who's going to actually tell me what's the ground truth is, than anything else, right? So I think things like that are where we're going to have to tweak. Instead of 500 questions in the questionnaire, how do we just really get focused on what were the causes of the data breaches and what are the response reactions that we want to take from a company? So that's probably where I see some innovation in this space headed.
I like that. And I guess within what you were saying there kind of answers why big tech won't do a third party questionnaire because they're just too big. And like, Salesforce are good enough for Google, then, are they going to respond to your small company? And I think people don't really realize that. And, do you think maybe like other areas of the business could perhaps help or maybe contribute, like your legal team or procurement? Because sometimes companies like may have a section of things they need to fill in that goes to other places. So let's just say there isn't automation, there isn't trust centers, there isn't AI helping, and people are still old school manual Excel spreadsheets. You know, is there any other department that could maybe help with that, or like kind of reduce the burden or reduce the time it takes you to complete it? Yeah.
The hard problem is really the other departments tend to be a bigger nightmare than these problems alone. And you're like, well, hey, Ross, how does this get worse? Well, it gets worse because when you go to a very large company, they have something called a master service license agreement, which means these are all the things we want to see in our terms and conditions in our contracts because we don't like to accept risk. Risk is bad for companies. So what happens is we say we want unlimited liability. If we give you our sensitive data and you lose that data, we want you to pay for millions of dollars in recompense for us. And you can just think of the example of Delta and American Airlines during the CrowdStrike breach. Clearly CrowdStrike caused an issue and those airlines couldn't recover quick enough. And so now they had to cancel thousands or millions of flights, which meant they had to pay all of those airline travelers money to for not being able to provide them a plane flight on time. And so they want to go back to CrowdStrike and say, you caused this breach, you're going to pay for it. And this is where it gets tricky because as a vendor, I don't want one contract to bankrupt my company. So I'm going to limit that and say, well, I only want this contract piece to be up to maybe 1 to 3 times the cost of the contract. So if I'm CrowdStrike and I make $10 million off of Delta Airlines, maybe I'll accept $30 million of liability. And of course, Delta doesn't want that. They want higher liability. So back and forth, the lawyers go like divorce attorneys because they're kind of not that different. And, they bicker. And so what you thought would be an easy contract to sign because you're like, CrowdStrike's the best. I just want to get this EDR, get it yesterday, ends up going months in procurement process. And the same thing also happens with the procurement team. They want to be able to show, I saved you so many, thousands or millions of dollars on the contract. So they're not incentivized to get a contract quickly. They want to save money. So the longer the contract takes, the more they can kind of whittle them down, like you're walking out of some bazaar and you're like, no, I don't want to buy it. It's too high. And then they back and forth and whittle on the price. So all these things are stopping speed of procurement. And I want to see this get faster. I really do. But it's not easy, and it takes a lot of political capital to change these entrenched processes at very large companies.
I like that. It was almost like kind of explaining why it never goes into these other areas because, ultimately it kind of slows everything down. And also kind of, I think that's a really good summary of that kind of ecosystem. I think hopefully it lands well with people as to why third party supplier and third party risk stuff is always a bit of a pain. So, but yeah, moving on to our last segment, then Ross, is the one thing in cyber you think is BS and needs a focus or needs to change within the industry. Yeah.
I'm going to take a very controversial stance right now. And I know people are going to listen to this and probably spit out their coffee when they hear this. But I think endpoint detection and response software is a bad and broken state for most companies today. And here's why I believe it. I believe we are trying to solve the wrong problem. The problem today with EDR is we believe we can detect every type of attack from every type of malicious actor on every type of infrastructure we can possibly do. And you can see how it's impossible to detect every virus, right? We've tried doing this with antivirus for decades, and we're trying to detect every MITRE TTP for decades with EDR. I think the future is this zero trust, least privilege thing. And now you're probably saying, well, that just sounds like buzzwords and baloney to me, but what does that actually mean? Instead of saying, here is every piece of software, I need to find it if it's bad, I think we need to go to an allow listing approach, which is, this is the only software that's allowed to run in my organization because I have approved it explicitly. If it is not on this allow list, we're blocking it, right? And I think that's an easier thing. It's shorter for me to say, here's the 200 applications we need to install on the endpoints. Then here's the 10 trillion types of malware I can possibly detect on the endpoints. That's an easier problem to solve. So I really think we're going to shift from EDRs to endpoint protection, which is really going to focus on allow listing and other things like ring fencing, where we say, hey, not only do I allow this app, but I need to really limit the permissions of this app. There's probably not a good reason for Microsoft Excel to talk to the internet. The only reason is somebody wrote a malicious macro to go download something malicious. There's probably not a good reason for that, right? And you could probably say the same thing about PowerShell scripts and a lot of other software that's in your environment. So I think solutions that focus on allow listing and ring fencing, things like a threat locker in this space, are going to be much more interesting for us. I think that's probably the biggest thing. And the other thing that I'm also really surprised, and this is where I get technology wrong too. Don't think I'm this oracle that can predict everything. Is I'm really surprised we have lived on Windows and Mac laptops. Not that I don't love them, but the attack surface on them is so big. Think of just how many agents you run on a Windows laptop. I think the future is likely going to be something that's much smaller, like a Chromebook. And you just think of how hard is it to breach only a Chrome browser, right? If that's the only thing on the laptop, that really shrinks your attack surface. And if I only have to patch one app, that's a lot easier to do than patching 200 apps. And oh, by the way, if I don't have to run 6 or 10 different agents on my endpoints, think of how much money I can save when I don't have to have all those agents. So I'm hoping that technology takes off. I haven't seen it outside of the education space, but this is where I'd love to see things change because I think it's a more secure outcome for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I think you made some good points. I mean, like EDR only relies on various different data sources, its engine. We take such an assumption with it that it's just going to like do everything and detect everything, like I think the kind of ratio to like, you'll know this better than me probably, it's like, if a 0-day exploit, we're relying on people in the industry to update an engine that then gets deployed to the EDR and make sure that it's, like for like, so, can detect it and run parallel. But the zero trust approach, I'm interested, how would you run that then? Like, obviously, let's just say hypothetically, it's an operating system, like a Chrome, like a Chromebook you had mentioned. Like, how would you manage that then? Like, if that was just solely endpoint protection, would it just be run as just a singular OS, or how would people manage it? Like a VDI or something? Yeah.
Yeah, so if we're talking about allow listing applications, there's this feature called Microsoft App Locker that nobody uses, and it can tell you what apps you allow. Now, I won't say it's the easiest to use. That's why I think tools like App Locker and Threat Locker have really won in this allow listing space. But there's going to be solutions like that. And then generally you're, applying different types of rules and configurations with a tool like Jamf for Mac or Intune for Windows that says, this is the policy and configurations. It's on the known good list, otherwise we're blocking it. And so it's looking at the hashes of files. And it's been a tricky industry, right? Because hey, if I have this version of software and I allow list that, okay, that makes sense. But what happens on the next version update? Well, that version wasn't in the allow list. So did I just break things? Well, the technology has gotten smarter than it used to be. So when you deploy new software, it isn't just you. It's probably every other Fortune 500 company and thousands of mid-sized companies out there. And so they're looking at those to say, oh, this is so common in every environment. So this is actually a well-known update pack and you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, it's currently in Windows, but I think if you look at some of these vendors selling these solutions, you'll just find it's easier to maintain at scale for an IT organization.
Nice. And any final thoughts, Ross, before we wrap up the episode?
Yeah, so just a couple of things. The first thing is please, 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 if you are a CISO and you want to get in touch, reach out to me. I'm Ross Young. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. If you want to get smarter in cybersecurity, please look at CISO Tradecraft. We have a LinkedIn page where we push content out all the time, and we have a fantastic GitHub page where you can go to learn all these different paths. So if you're like, hey, I want to learn more about a SOC because I've only done GRC, you can listen to the episodes there. Or if I've only done AppSec and I really want to learn all the laws and regulations being passed in the EU because I'm this dumb American who's never really done anything in Europe, well, there's lessons on those too. So lots of things to help grow and increase your knowledge. Your tradecraft is what we call it. And I'm just so glad to be a part of this community and help out. So Leo, thanks again for having me on the show, and just look forward to catching up with you again and with the listeners anytime on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Ross. Again, thank you for your time. And I must say that the Git has the amount of information on that Git is insane. Like, actually, I think I spent about 3.5 hours one night after you showed me. And I was honestly, like, the following day I was in work, I was like, look at this, sharing some information. And to get people that were kind of other non-technical audience, into it, which was really good. It made my week, to be honest, Ross. So again, I cannot thank you enough for that. And everyone, please show Ross some love online. As he said, he's offering up his time. Anybody needs anything, obviously within reason, please reach out. And again, thank you so much. Everyone, please like, share, subscribe. And thanks again, Ross. I really appreciate it.
No problem. It's my pleasure. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.